Today, we're looking at one possible explanation for why some people are more likely to obey authority than others. This is the dispositional explanation, and it suggests that obedience comes from inside the person rather than from the situation they're in. Before we go on, I just want to mention that in the description, there's a link that will take you to a free notes scaffolding outline, as well as a Google form that you can do as often as you like for basic facts revision on this topic. Right, the authoritarian personality, a dispositional explanation of obedience. Let's unpack this concept for a moment. The word disposition means a person's natural tendency, personality, or way of thinking. So when psychologists talk about a dispositional explanation, they're saying that some people are more likely to obey authority because of the kind of person they are. And this is different from a situational explanation, which says obedience happens because of external factors like the environment, pressure from others, or the authority figure's uniform. So what is the authoritarian personality? Well, it refers to a set of traits that make a person more likely to obey authority figures. And by the way, a trait is a personality characteristic, one that doesn't change much over time. People with an authoritarian personality tend to value rules and believe authority must be obeyed, and they see disobedience as wrong. So obedience for them feels like the morally correct thing to do. And this idea was first developed by Theodor Adorno and his colleagues in 1950. They were trying to understand how ordinary people in Nazi Germany had carried out extreme acts of obedience to the extent of causing great harm to other people. Instead of blaming the situation alone, Adorno suggested that some people have a personality that makes them naturally more obedient, an authoritarian personality. And people with an authoritarian personality often show black and white thinking. So they see the world as either right or wrong, good or bad, no middle ground. And because of this, they find change uncomfortable and threatening, and they prefer clear-cut rules and structure. Adorno suggested that the authoritarian personality begins in childhood, and he posited that children raised by very strict parents, where they're not allowed to question rules, they learn that obedience is expected at all times, and because of that, they don't learn to think critically, they just learn to follow orders. And they see authority figures as legitimate and powerful, believing that people with uniforms or titles or positions, people like police officers and teachers and doctors, automatically deserve unquestioning obedience. Adorno also believed that people with an authoritarian personality often show hostility towards those who break rules or do not conform. They strongly dislike people who are different. For example, people with different beliefs, lifestyles, or backgrounds. And they often blame these groups for social problems. Adorno explained this using the idea of repressed anger. Children who develop an authoritarian personality because they experience harsh parenting and strict discipline cannot express their anger towards their parents because they fear punishment or the loss of love. Love in that kind of situation is conditional. As a result, this anger is repressed. In other words, pushed down rather than dealt with. Later in life, the anger is displaced onto weaker or less powerful groups, which can lead to both prejudice and strong obedience to authority figures. To measure the authoritarian personality, Adorno and his colleagues created the California F scale. The F stands for fascism because the scale was designed to measure attitudes linked to extreme obedience and authoritarian rule, as you have in fascism. The F scale works by asking people to rate how much they agree with a series of statements that reflect authoritarian beliefs. such as the importance of strict discipline, strong leadership, and unquestioning obedience to authority. And a high score suggests stronger authoritarian traits, meaning the person is more likely to respect authority, value rules, and obey orders without question. An example statement might be something like, obedience and respect for authority are the most important virtues children should learn. Now, if somebody strongly agrees with that statement and others like it, it suggests authoritarian attitudes. Adorno tested over 2,000 Americans, which is quite a large sample. He found that people who scored highly on the F scale were more likely to show prejudice and support strong, strict leaders. And this was taken as evidence that personality traits and obedience are linked. Adorno's idea about childhood experiences influencing personality was later supported by some research. In 1966, Elms and Milgram studied participants who had taken part in Milgram's obedience experiments previously, and they found that the most obedient participants also scored higher on the F scale. And these same participants also reported having had less close relationships with their own fathers. Together, this evidence supports Adorno's earlier idea that personality and early childhood experiences can play an important role in explaining obedience. Let's look at some strengths and limitations of the authoritarian personality theory. One strength of this explanation is that it helps explain why some people obeyed more than others in Milgram's study. It also helps explain obedience in extreme situations like Nazi Germany. And it links personality to real behavior, not just laboratory situations. But the authoritarian personality theory also has several important weaknesses, and these limit how useful it is for explaining obedience. First, the F scale has been criticized for being politically biased. The scale was designed to measure fascist right-wing authoritarianism, and it assumes that extreme obedience only comes from the political right. In reality, history shows that extreme obedience can also be found on the far left, such as in totalitarian communist regimes. The scale therefore measures only one type of authoritarianism, which limits its validity. Second, the F scale uses leading questions. Many statements are worded in a way that encourages agreement, which means participants may respond in a socially acceptable way or agree without thinking carefully, and this reduces the accuracy of the results. Most importantly, Adorno's theory ignores situational factors. Milgram's research clearly showed that ordinary people can become highly obedient because of the situation that they're placed in, such as the presence of an authority figure, the setting, or the use of uniform. And this suggests that obedience cannot be explained by personality alone. So, while the theory helps us understand why some people may be more obedient than others, it cannot fully explain obedience without also considering situational pressures. So to summarize, the authoritarian personality is a dispositional explanation of obedience. It suggests that obedience has its roots in childhood experiences and personality traits develop over time. There is some supporting research, such as the link between F-scale scores and obedience, but the theory cannot explain obedience on its own. In reality, obedience is usually the result of a combination of personality and situational factors, not one or the other.